Thank you so much, Joyce and Felisa. I really appreciate this opportunity today to talk to everyone about PBIS. So before we actually begin the presentation, what I would like to do is review our agenda. So first, we are going to talk about what is PBIS and how is it structured. Then we'll talk about identifying the target population when implementing PBIS. I know Joyce mentioned it a moment ago. It's not just for ESE students, so we'll talk a little bit more about the target population. And then after that, we'll talk about the components that make PBIS effective. And then we'll conclude the presentation with implementation strategies to maximize PBIS. So exactly what is PBIS? PBIS is an acronym for Positive Behavior Interventions and Supports. And PBIS started in the late 1980s, early 1990s, and it emerged from two different themes. The first theme was focused on behavior support. And not just behavior supports, but also using those supports to improve the quality of life for those students, their families, and the community at large. And then the second theme focused on interventions. And interventions in the sense of individual interventions, classroom interventions, as well as whole school interventions. And those two themes merge to create what is now called PBIS, or Positive Behavior Interventions and Supports. PBIS is also a multi-tiered system, and it consists of graduated levels of support based on student needs. And we'll talk a little bit more about the tiers and the levels of support. So a more formal definition of PBIS would be that PBIS is a system or a framework that reinforces the positive behaviors of students doing what is expected of them, as well as support students who need extra assistance. Now, let's talk about how PBIS is structured. So PBIS emphasizes 5 interrelated elements, and the elements are truly interrelated. So the first element we want to talk about is equity. PBIS wants to encourage schools and other organizations to have high expectations for all of their students, not just some of their students. The other interrelated element are systems. And when we talk about systems, we're talking about teaming structures, training and coaching and other supports for those staff members and those teachers and those education leaders at those particular school. For example, in the school where I work, one of the teaming structures is a leadership team. The leadership team consists of like the administrators, our CRTs, our testing coordinators, and our intervention specialists. Now we'll have an administration team that consists of the principal, the assistant principals, and myself, the dean. So depending on the environment that you're in, the teaming structures will look different. And when we talk about the tiers, those different teaming structures will be different at the different tiers for PBIS. Data is also a very important element that PBIS emphasizes, and teams use that data to select and monitor and evaluate outcomes and the practices and the systems. And so the data is related to every aspect of the interrelated elements. The practices in that particular environment are critical to how we create a positive school environment for our students and our staff. And the outcome is the final interrelated element, we want to make sure that we improve whatever outcomes that we have designated or identified for that particular environment. So I'm going to pause right now, just in case there are any questions or comments that anyone has at this particular time.
Okay, I'll jump on in with one for you.
Okay.
It's a similar, it's a kind of interesting one in terms of, and you might be answering this in your next few slides. So if you do,
Okay.
it's coming on up. But is there a good way to introduce this to parents? Like so they can understand why you have certain goals on your IEP, and also maybe they can echo things at home that also support the same sort of an approach. So
Thank you for that question too, Joyce. There definitely is a better way to introduce it to parents, because there have been instances where parents have been opposed to schools implementing PBIS. And so when you bring those stakeholders together, parents will be a critical part of the process in identifying which outcomes we are hoping to achieve in that particular environment. And so bringing parents to the table and ensuring that they have a seat at the table will assist and ensure that parents understand the reason why that particular school environment would like to implement PBIS in that particular school, and also give parents an opportunity to ask questions and understand that this is something that is research-based, that this is something that has been in place for a number of years, and there are many, many studies to support that is beneficial to all students.
awesome. Awesome.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Are there any other questions or comments?
Not right now. I think we can move forward.
Thank you. So as we mentioned a few minutes ago about the target population, PBIS is for everyone. It's not just for ESE students. PBIS is for non-ESE students, as well as elementary students. PBIS is for secondary students, as well as those high-risk populations. I want to read a quote to you as you read it to yourselves, and then we'll talk a little bit more about it. To prevent the exclusion of students with disabilities by providing incentives for whole school approaches, scientifically based early reading programs, positive behavioral interventions and supports, and early intervening services to reduce the need to label children as disabled in order to address the learning and behavioral needs of such children. And this particular quote was taken from an IDEA, which IDEA, many of you probably know, but just in case there's someone that's new to education and they're not familiar with the acronym, IDEA stands for Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And I thought it was important to include this particular quote, especially when we're talking about our target population. One of the things that I have been a part of discussions that talked about is intervening early and often. And I want to just share, and I know that Joyce mentioned that I have held several different positions in my career. One of the positions that really brought to light the need for PBIS was the position where I was an administrator and I facilitated pre-expulsion meetings. And this is where I became very interested in PBIS and finding out more about how we can intervene so that students don't get to the point where they're facing a recommendation for expulsion. I often wondered, did the school that the student attended implement PBIS? And if so, was PBIS implemented with fidelity? And if so, what could have happened if that student were given the opportunity to be exposed to PBIS? So I don't know if there are any questions or comments. I have another quote that I wanted to share with you. And again, I'll read it out loud while you read it to yourselves. Number one, for students with long, complex histories of severe problem behavior, reactive solutions are likely to exacerbate antisocial behavior. Number two, in the absence of positive and preventive approaches to behavior, punishment and exclusion are ineffective. And number three, although short-term reductions in problem behaviors may occur, reactive discipline does not foster a positive school environment or prevent antisocial behavior. And this is taken from a quote from Sugai and Horner from a document that was published in 2002. And you may be familiar with those names if you know anything about PBIS, because these two gentlemen are considered two of the founders of PBIS. One of the reasons why I included this particular quote is, as I shared in my previous role as an administrator where I facilitated the pre-expulsion meetings, I felt that at that point we were reacting to the behaviors. And yes, the data did show that there were reductions in behaviors, but I wonder now, where are those students? And maybe 1 or 2 years later, what was happening in terms of the behavior in their particular school environment? Did it improve? Did they reoffend again? So I'm just very curious about what happens to students who have not been exposed to PBIS and many times are facing reactive discipline solutions in that particular environment. So this is a familiar graphic for some, maybe all of you. This is our PBIS tier, and it's considered a multi-level tiered approach. And as you can see in the green area, that is the majority of where our, well, it's for all of our students, and the majority of our students will fall in this particular area, about 80% of our students. And what this area represents is tier 1. In a PBIS model, tier 1 are those practices that schools or school communities create that is beneficial for all students. So it may include that at the beginning of every morning, students will recite the school creed for that particular school environment. It may include that every single student will walk on the right side of the hallways when they are particularly transitioning, or as they transition, students know that they will transition at a particular voice level. So these are those practices that schools have created and implemented that is beneficial to the entire school population. So that represents tier 1. The middle tier is where some of our students will fall. That we consider tier 2. Tier 2 represents about 10 to 15% of the school population. We consider it targeted support for those students who may be struggling with behaviors. Maybe the tier 1 supports aren't enough for those particular students and they need some additional support. And so these would be those groups of students. For example, what some schools do is they create groups of students and they work with those students at particular times during the week. And they may work on things like social behaviors or social skills with those particular students to help improve those behaviors so that they can be a part of that positive school environment and demonstrating those positive behaviors. The last group in the red, which we have very few students in this particular area, maybe about 5%, these represent those students who need the most intense support. This is that individualized supports. These may be those students that we would need to solicit wraparound services for. The social worker would get involved with this particular student, or maybe the mental health particular person. I will share with you in the role that I am currently in, those students that we have identified in our tier 3 that need that individualized intensive support. Those students may be receiving services from our mental health practitioner. In addition to that, they may also be receiving support from our behavior support practitioner and even our behavior analysts at that support. So these are those students that need the most intensive support. At this point, I'm going to pause and ask if there are any questions or comments.
I have a couple of questions for you, Valencia. One is, would you consider those students that are in the few to be defined as high-risk students?
In many cases, I would. In many cases, and remember, when we talk about high-risk students, there are a number of categories that would identify them as at risk for different things. So I would say yes. For the most part, yes, I would consider those students as high-risk students. And they may be high risk in terms of behavior. It could be mental health issues that we've identified. Again, in my current role, we've identified some of those students based on behaviors that could threaten themselves or even others. They may be at high risk for dropping out of school. They may be at high risk for academic failure. So there are a number of reasons why we have identified those students in that tier 3 category.
Okay.
Thank you for that question.
Of course, I have another one. So do you have examples of outcomes and data collection methods?
So different school environments determine their different outcomes. So, for example, in some school environments, they may decide that we want to improve our math and language or ELA scores. That may be their overall ultimate goal. And they've decided that by implementing PBIS, because the research support improve academic performance, that they're going to implement PBIS for that particular reason. And so there is research that supports different intended outcomes. It just depends on that particular school environment. One of the other things that I've been a part of as one of the outcomes is reducing the number of discipline referrals so that we can increase the amount of instructional time, that time on task that students have. So I don't have access to the data with me right at this moment, but there is data available that supports those particular outcomes. So it just depends on the school environment and what they have identified as what they value as their goal or their intended outcome. Thank
Okay,
you for
good.
that question as
You're
well.
welcome. Thanks for answering.
All righty. If there are no other questions, we will move to our third portion. And let me go back. So we want to talk about what constitutes an effective PBIS framework. So if you are a school leader or a classroom teacher, I know we have a number of different roles represented on this particular webinar. We want to make sure that these are those elements that are implemented or included across all three of the tiers. So the first one that we want to look at is that shared vision for a positive school culture. And this will require some level of conversation, because I'll share an example with you. When I've had conversations with different educators, I've found out that different people have different ideas of what a positive school climate means, and what elements make a school culture positive. So we definitely need to have conversations about what that looks like and what elements exist in a positive school culture. I'll give you another example. One of the things that I've experienced in terms of a positive school culture, and I've actually been asked this question. Sometimes it is as simple as when you go into a school building and whether or not anyone says good morning to you in that particular environment. So I've worked in environments where before I could say good morning to a student, the student said good morning to me, to my surprise. And I was so excited to see that in every aspect of that particular school environment, where students were saying good morning, they were greeting the adults, and it created a very positive environment for me as well as the students. And then on the other side, I've been in an environment where students didn't say good morning or they didn't greet the adults. In addition to that, when the adults said good morning, I was one of those adults, the students did not respond. And so what I found myself doing in that particular environment is having those intentional conversations with students and making sure that they understood what you should be doing. What is the expected behavior? When someone says good morning to you, your response should be good morning, hello, how are you? Many times students didn't know that they were supposed to respond. Sometimes they even looked away when I said good morning or when an adult addressed them with a greeting. So it is important to have those conversations about what it looks like in a positive school culture. The next item, in terms of making sure that you have an effective PBIS framework, is that the leadership team should meet regularly. And it just depends on the school environment. In many cases, the leadership teams will meet once a week. I've also been in school environments where the leadership team meets once a day. It just depends on that particular school environment, what the needs are. Next, we should have actively engaged families, and we mentioned this a few minutes ago, is ensuring that our parents have a seat at the table. We need to remember that many of our parents have had, unfortunately, a negative experience with school as a student and sometimes even as a parent. And in some cases, our parents are very intimidated if they feel they don't have the level of education that they would like to have had. And so we need to make sure that our parents feel welcome and invited and actively engaged, because as educators, our parents are our partners. And I believe that parents are their child's first and best teacher. So I've always tried to establish a positive relationship and make sure that I'm actively engaging parents, even in my current role. I know when I call parents, sometimes as soon as I say hello and they hear my voice, I can just hear them gasp, like, oh no, not again, not Miss Boyd calling me again. And sometimes I have to say, wait. This is a positive phone call. This is a positive phone call. And then they go, oh, thank you so much. Or, just thank you for calling. I just appreciate you reaching out. So we definitely want to engage our families and make sure that they know we want their child to be successful just as much as they want their child to be successful. The next thing we want to make sure that's incorporated is a supportive and involved administration. I will tell you that many of my colleagues will share with me that they look to the administration to see what they're doing and how they're responding to different initiatives that have been implemented. So as administrators, we need to make sure that we're modeling the desired behavior that we're asking our teachers and our students to model. So the next one in terms of a foundational system is that ongoing professional development. And I cannot stress the importance of professional development. I was blessed and extremely fortunate to receive an enormous amount of professional development. And when I speak to people who did not have that opportunity, many of them are very disappointed and disenchanted, and in some cases consider leaving the profession because they don't feel that they have received the training and the mentoring and the coaching that they need in order to be effective in their particular role. So I just cannot stress the importance of professional development for all staff. And then we need a systematic collection of data. And in another way I can say that is this expression that we use in one of the school districts: in God we trust, all others bring data. And it stressed the importance of data and making sure that we're making decisions based on the data that we're receiving from whatever groups that are involved. And it has to be ongoing. We can't just stop and look at data from the very beginning. This needs to be ongoing progress monitoring throughout the school year. And the last foundational system is that disaggregating of data. As my role in facilitating pre-expulsion meetings, this is one of those areas that we looked at very closely because we noticed that there were very wide disparities in particular subgroups. And we wanted, as much as we possibly could, we wanted to bring this to the attention of all of our stakeholders so that we could close that gap, so that we could make sure that all of our students were being given the same opportunities. So I'm going to pause here for questions or comments.
I have a question from Tawanda. She says, if a student receives special services for academic work, should we go through the tier steps for behavior? Because she's hesitant to over-identify students because they already receive special services.
Appreciate that question, and it's a very good question, actually, and I would say yes. So and I understand the concern about over identifying, and one of the things we look at as a team, and this is the especially that tier 3 team that I'm a part of. We look at the behavior and how it may be impacting the academics. Is the behavior occurring because the student is struggling academically. So they're almost tied together, and sometimes it's very difficult to untwine which one is impacting, which one is causing. So that's when you really have to take the team approach and make a determination as to, is the student misbehaving perhaps because the work is too difficult? They're struggling with reading strategies. So do we provide those reading strategy supports so that the student can become more confident and they won't act out every time they end up in reading because they're embarrassed because they can't read? So I would say
Good
yes.
point. Good point. Okay, one more question. How do you suggest getting staff buy-in for PBIS?
I love that question because that is a very, very important question. And, as educators, a lot of times we say, okay, well, here's another, program. And by the way, PBIS is not a program. It is very important that we get buy-in. And I think the movement that I'm seeing right now is people want to know the why behind things. And I think if we explain to teachers, and I've had this conversation as a dean of students with grade levels, and one of the things that I'm sharing with them is the research is saying suspension doesn't work. The research supports that in the long term, when you suspend students, you still will have students misbehaving and they have lost instructional time. So we, in some cases, won't need to suspend students if we implement PBIS with fidelity. If we're proactive and preventative, then we don't have to be as reactive when things happen.
Yeah, sure.
Another question.
I don't have another one, but Tawanda did reply to your response, and she said, I'm finding that we are saying they are sped, so they get everything. We do not put interventions in place and just say they need BIEP or BIP. We just say, oh, they're sped, and shovel them into a category, and then they don't get the help that they need.
And I agree that that is absolutely true. And I want to share a quick story with you. When I worked in a district, there was an ESE student that graduated with a special diploma. And after he graduated, it may have been a couple of years, he actually came to the district office upset, very upset. Security had to be called because I guess he had been, looking for a job in the community and found that the diploma that he had received or the skills or the training that he had received wasn't adequate for what he needed at that particular time. So he was very, very frustrated. So I'm a big advocate of not making excuses, because also in the community, most people may not realize that they have an IEP. So what we want to do is we want to prepare our students for life and job skills, like what Joyce mentioned with Education Associates in our Project Discovery. We want to make sure that we're preparing our ESE students properly and not just saying, oh, they're ESE and we're excusing or allowing the behavior. Interventions, when they are implemented with fidelity, they are successful at changing behavior and bringing about the desired behavior when we implement those interventions with fidelity.
For sure. Agreed.
All
That's all the
righty.
questions I had.
Okay, so we will move on. All righty. So here's another quote that I wanted to share. The strongest predictor of both sustained implementation and sustained improved student outcomes was implementation of classroom PBIS systems. And this was taken from McIntosh et al. 2017 publication. So we'll talk a little bit about the classroom. So if you were a teacher or you work in a school environment, you know how important it is to establish those procedures and those routines day one, and not to assume that students come to us knowing exactly what is expected of them. We have to be intentional. We have to teach what our expectations are, especially in the classroom. And even more so in a secondary environment, if the students have multiple teachers, because they go from class to class and different teachers have different expectations. So as a classroom teacher, when we're implementing PBIS, which was the strongest predictor, when we implement those PBIS strategies in our classroom, we will see positive outcomes. And when we use those positive practices with our students, and one of the examples was just greeting our students at the door. Many times that tells us whether or not our students are going to have a fantastic day or a challenging day, just by greeting them at the door and looking at their face and saying, "Hey, how are you? How was it this morning? Did you have a good night?" And I've been surprised when I've asked students questions like that, because some students will be very candid with you and say things like, "No, I really didn't have a good night. I didn't eat," or "My mom and my granddad got into an argument and now we have to find a place to stay." So that immediately put me on notice that this particular student may have some issues focusing that particular day because of things that happened the previous day. So it's really, really important that we teach the behaviors that we would like to see or we expect from our students, and that we model those positive practices with our students. We talk about how to come into our classroom, especially if our outcome is we want to maximize instructional time or we want bell-to-bell instruction. Well, saying those things are important, but showing our students what we mean by that. For example, when you come into my classroom, as you enter the room, I need you to grab your iPad. I need you to grab your journal. I need you to have a seat. I need you to put your book bag in your cubby, and I will have the bell work or the do now. You immediately get started. You sharpen your pencils, whatever the routine is. If we tell the students exactly what we expect from them, in most cases, students will follow the instructions and they will demonstrate the desired behavior. The last thing for implementation for classroom teachers that I want to share is get the support. If there is an issue that you are struggling with, there is probably someone on your campus, and if not on your campus, probably someone at your district office. I don't know, depending on the state that you live in, that you have the MTSS support team or the RTI. And when I say MTSS, I'm referring, it's an acronym for the multi-tiered systems of support, or RTI, the response to intervention team, that can assist you with implementing those PBIS strategies in the classroom. So the next group that we want to talk about in terms of implementation strategies are those school leaders. And this goes back to that question of, how do you get buy-in from your teachers or from your staff? So first, we need to get buy-in from our leadership team, because if we aren't on one accord, the teachers will immediately identify that there is some dissension, or we're not all on the same page. And so we want to make sure that our leadership team understands the why. They've been given the opportunity to ask questions. They've received the training that they need in order to assist and support our staff. Because if our leadership team is unsure or they're uncomfortable about implementing PBIS, then that is going to be a problem for our teachers, because the teachers are going to rely on our leadership team when they have questions or concerns. So once we gather our leadership team, we need to assess what's already in place. What do we currently have in place to create a positive school environment, to maximize our intended outcomes? Look at the systems that we already have in place, and maybe some of those systems we can incorporate in our PBIS implementation. Some of the systems work, and they will help us in terms of our implementation. The next thing we want to do as a school leader in terms of implementing PBIS is to solidify those PBIS basics. We want to make sure that we go back to those 5 elements. Equity, that all students have access to the same supports. So when we create that particular school-wide positive behavior plan, all students are a part of that, and they all receive the same tier 1 support. The last thing, even as a school leader, you can also ask for support from the district office, from your state team. There are individuals in every state that can provide support to school leaders if your district doesn't have someone with the expertise that's needed to assist with implementing PBIS. And then if you are a district or a state leader, then I would recommend that you contact your state coordinator. And also, part of the information that I use, I was able to find most of it at the pbis.org site, which is a center on positive behavior interventions and support. There is an enormous amount of information on that particular website. In particular, there is a document titled PBIS Implementation Blueprint, Part 1, and it is just for those district and state leaders that is interested in implementing PBIS on a very large scale. So are there any questions or comments at this point?
No new comments or questions right now. But we're going to look at the clock and just kind of keep moving forward because we're getting close. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Fantastic.
And I appreciate that, Joyce. So these are the references that I used. And this is the website that I just mentioned, the PBIS website. And that concludes my presentation. I want to thank everyone for joining us for our Wednesday webinar. I'm going to turn it back over to our facilitator, Joyce. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Oh my goodness. I've got pages of notes ready here. Hold on with my camera back on there. Just love it. And I'm just going to echo a couple of comments there. Maria was just mentioning in here that the staff needs to know these strategies, to know when they're used. It does take time. It's not a waving a magic wand. I love that, Maria. It isn't. There are no magic wands out of all of this. It takes time to reinforce and to just keep giving everybody that positive behavior. Prior to that, I had added in that it's also important to work with non-instructional staff. Your bus drivers, the aides that are on the bus drivers, our paraprofessionals, well, they're sort of in their instructional, or even just office staff, because that might be the first person the student sees in the morning. You know, if you have a student who just can't get it together in the morning and they're always showing up late, they're always walking into the front office with a note. And if they're not, getting the same sort of, oh, we missed you, we're glad you're here. And, and welcome, let's get this going. Come on, let's get to class and, get the kids feeling like they did the right thing instead of you again. Are you late again?
For
Right?
sure.
We will get out of that interaction what we put into it. And
Absolutely.
I just got to say thank you so much, because it's really so
Thank you.
wonderful to hear. It is for all students, and it's everybody that we need to get going on this. We are just 2 minutes shy of being at our hour point. So I wanted to just make sure everybody joins me here. You can join on the chat and just say thank you so much, Valencia Boyd. Really fantastic, wonderful information. We are just truly blessed to have you here with us today, and to have everybody else here with us. There were a lot of questions about, can you get more information? So yes, yes, and yes. So there are all sorts of things. If you go to our website and you go to resources, there's preview packets there that will give you an opportunity to look directly at the solutions. There are a newsletter that you can log into, you can sign up for. And I've had a lot of, especially directors, especially, who will log in for this. They'll get the newsletter and they forward it on to their team, because it's not a sales newsletter. It's kind of a recap of our monthly webinar Wednesdays. And so this information on PBIS will be written on up, and we'll put it on in there. And you can get a private tour, your own little Zoom consultation that will help you if you want to ask more questions about Education Associates. And last but certainly not least, we do record all of these. You will get a copy. I do a PDF of the slides, so you'll have that information that you can look at and share. You'll also have a recording that you can share with your colleagues and other members that need to know all of these good things. Plenty of information for you up on our resources page and on our Webinar Wednesday page. Please join me again in saying thank you so much to Valencia. Oh, there's one other thing that there was in the resources I forgot. Oh, there's also resources and information and show you how you can find funds for all of these good things. So it's all in there. Go to the website. But do please join me again for thanking Valencia. It was really just
Good job.
like I
Nice
said,
job.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I love
Nice job.
writing notes when it makes sense and everything just works. And I love, in God we trust, all others bring data.
Mhm.
Oh,
Nice.
that's a keeper. Thanks to everybody who's here today. And you can see in the chat, everybody's saying, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Accolades there. We thank everybody for joining us and spending part of our day, and for all the work that you do with our most important resource, our children. So wish you all a very great day. And thank you. Have a wonderful day. All right. So we stop, and I should have done the recording first, but they can edit this part out here. I'll stop the recording too.